Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of APUS History. I am your host, Langella Sensei. So guys, I'm going to do a quick little video here to kind of go over some of the material we covered on Monday, but also talk about some new material that we are doing today. Okay, so let's just get started. I'll do a quick little summary so that at least we're not, don't forget everything we already mentioned before. Okay, so last time we were here, guys, we mainly focused on some of the Native American tribes that were in a little bit of Central and South America, but mainly in the North American region. Okay, so let's just jump right into this. The major thing we need to realize is that the civilizations of Central and South America that we need to know about are really the Aztecs, the Incans, and the Mayans. And the reason why we need to know about them really for this course is because the biggest contribution they had for American history, it has to be with the cultivation of maize or corn. And the reason why this is important is because with this connection to the tribes in North America, we start to see a influx of population, and because corn or maize is such a good resource to have a stable nutritional factor to it. Okay, we start to see the Aztec civilization, the Incan civilization really spark and explode with population because of these new resources, new crops that are being developed. And the fact that they now have a stable food source, we see them be more organized. They have more of a social structure. They have more extensive trade. And that same thing happens with a lot of the North American tribes. So when we look at the North American tribes, we kind of divide them into 5 sections, right? We look at the West, Southwest, Northeast, Southeast, and the Great Plains. And the important thing to understand about each of these is that based on the region and the geographic features that they're living in, they have a different way of interacting and adapting to those environments, and each of them live a little bit differently. So first one we looked at was the tribes in the West. The major thing you need to understand about the tribes in the West is that basically they are mainly hunting and going after fish. Okay, that's like the big thing you need to understand for this, right? They have some farming communities, but mainly most of their resources, almost all the resources are gathered through fishing and hunting and gathering. And now what's really interesting about the tribes in the West is that they are so diverse. They have basically like 100 tribes just in the state of California. And the fact that they are on the coastline means that they really relied on those materials or those resources of the sea, and also of the many different water systems that they were that are throughout California. Now, based on where they lived, they had different types of houses. We look at wood and leaf style of housing. And what's interesting about them is they have a pretty distinct social structure where the males are fishermen and hunters, while the women are farmers. Now we transition to the Southwest. Now the Southwest is different. It's more of a dry, arid climate. So that means that they have to focus on different types of ways to get the resources. They do have some areas of farming. However, majority of the resources come from trading, right? They have interactions between the Latin American tribes, which actually provide them the corn that they need for having a stable lifestyle, right? And due to the lack of vegetation, they live in different types of housing, stone and adobe housing. Now, what's important to understand about this area is that because of the lack of waterways, they have to use very complicated irrigation systems to get the water needed to have any sort of resources in general. Okay. Now let's take a look at the Northeast. Northeast is completely different. Very temperate climate, pretty good for farming. The problem is that there's a lot of hills, there's a lot of mountains, so they can't really farm in these massive areas, but they can farm enough to kind of stabilize themselves. Now, the major the major crops we really look at for the Northeast is really what they call the three sister farming. And this is squash, beans, and corn. Now, having these 3 crops is really important because beans is really good for protein. Corn is good for starches that allow for a lot of energy and really enough healthy fats for them to kind of be able to use for the day. And obviously squash is good carbs, so it allows them to have a pretty nice nutritional spread. All right. And with having that stable food source allows these areas to kind of become very complex, right? The Ohio River Valley is one of those examples. They have a lot of different diverse Native American groups in those areas, but probably one of the most famous has to be the Iroquois League, right? The Iroquois League is made up of several different Native American tribes that made in a trading and defensive alliance with one another, right? The fact that they didn't have to go really out hunting as much was a pretty big deal. Now, when they did have to go hunt, they relied on their on the trading alliance to make sure that there weren't any other outside Native American groups breaking into their barrier, basically. And this was considered almost like the first American democracy, because this is really the first time you really see a alliance of this sort, almost like a division of states, okay? And based on the housing, the long houses here, you can tell that they are more stationary. Let's take a look at the now southeast. Now, we talked about farming for the northeast region. This is like a completely different standard of farming. Based on all the different waterways shown on this map here, you can tell that they have a lot of access to fresh water, okay? And that's what's really important about the southeast region. The fact that they have so much water and the land is perfect for farming, their villages, their communities explode, as in their population is now increasing tenfold, right? Just take a look at the stat about the village, which is in modern-day St. Louis. 40,000 people were in those villages, right? And this is a big deal, right? Because now with more population, people now, they have a lot more power. And probably the most powerful tribes of these areas, the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, the Creeks, the Seminoles. These are all very powerful Native American tribes, and they are considered the 5 civilized tribes. And this was deemed this title was given to them by the colonists because they respected them so highly because of how organized they were. They had their own social structure, they had their own law structure, and they even had basically leaders that really guided them politically, right? And which is a really important concept. And the last grouping of tribes is the Plains, right? The Great Plains. And these Native American groups were mainly hunters and gatherers. They lived in mainly nomadic in communities really where they're moving along where the animals are living, and that's completely different from any of the tribes we've really seen. Now, there is a mix of some, there is more farming than other, but this is mainly a nomadic hunting gathering tribes. Okay, they did have some farm, but they were mainly hunting and gathering for all their resources. And you can kind of tell by the way they lived, right? You look at the teepees here. The teepees are more like tents, right? So clearly they're not sticking around for a long time. They're trying to follow where the food goes. I gave you guys a little bit of review videos here to help you out just in case you want to review, but let's get on to some new material, right? Now we're going to talk about the motivations of exploration. So the big thing, guys, is we probably already know this idea, but the 3 G's is probably the easiest thing that we all remember from global history class, right? God, gold, and glory. And I'll give you a quick little summary of each of these examples. We'll go deeper into them in the next few slides. So let's talk about God, right? The religious motivations for these Europeans it traces all the way back to the Crusades. Now, the Crusades, guys, is a holy war between the Christians and the Muslims. Now, the problem is that a lot of the Christians had lost a lot of land to the Muslims, so to them, this was personal. They wanted to try to expand their territory to spread Christianity to as many places as possible. So think of it almost like the Cold War of religion, okay? And they felt as if they were losing to the Muslims, so they needed to now fight back even harder. So this is kind of a second wave of the Crusades. So, for example, one of the major European nations that wanted to spread Christianity was the Spanish, okay? Now, the Spanish were trying to what they called the Reconquista, which is a reconquering of the Christian faith. So they thought that if they can expand their territory even more and spread Christianity by conquering, then they would be doing God's work, right? Now let's take a look at gold. So we're going to jump into more detail in this, but the fact is there was a Silk Road, right, that's being developed that started from China, touches parts of India, and goes all the way to Europe. And the major thing you have to understand is that a lot of the European monarchs were dying for these really lucrative goods, right, they're being traded along the Silk Road. So they really want to have access to this. So by having exploration, finding a way to get closer to this market, to find a way to gain access to this market on a cheaper price, is a big deal. That means if whoever can find that path would make a lot of money, okay? So that's really the goal. We'll jump into that very soon. And then lastly, guys, glory. There's a competition really going on between the Portuguese and the Spanish. And this competition really consists of who can conquer more land compared to the other, who can gain more colonies compared to each other or all the different European nations. So the competition between the Portuguese and the Spanish really sparked a kind of a exploration shopping spree to see who can gain more land compared to somebody else. So let's take a look at a little bit more detail into really the gold concept, the idea of the Silk Road. So we need to make sure we understand the Silk Road really started in China, but it did also touch in places of India as well. So when the Silk Road starts out in China, it starts around here, it does have to go through a lot of different trade routes to get to Europe, okay? And now, obviously, this isn't just one line. The Silk Road is many different lines, okay? But by the time it gets to Europe, the amount of money that is being that it takes to get the caravans all the way to Europe is a lot, right? It takes a lot. So that means, based on the idea of supply and demand and the idea of opportunity costs and all these economic terms, by the time the monarchs get these goods, they have to pay our top dollar because of the amount of effort it took for really the caravans to reach Europe. So the monarchs were really upset about this. They really wanted to gain these goods, but at a cheaper price. So what they wanted to do was try to push a lot of their explorers, a lot of their professional navigationists to find a way to get to the Silk Road, so that at least it makes their lives a little bit easier, so they have to pay, give up their entire wallet for a pretty pricey good from China, okay? The problem is, though, there wasn't really any boats that can make the trip, right? There are some ideas that maybe they can go around Africa, but the problem is that the boats couldn't really go too far away from the coastline, or else they would just crash because of the really horrible tides, okay? But in comes Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry of Portugal, in the early 1400s, says, I want to get to the Silk Road. I want to develop navigation to the point where they can do whatever he desires with boats, right? So he invests all this money into navigation. He ends up creating the caravel. Now, the caravel is like a revolution in shipbuilding, okay? It's a new type of ship. And then the reason why it's so important into the story of America is because there's a few things that really sets it apart. It's a lot more easier to maneuver, as in you can kind of, if there's a wreckage up ahead or there's some rocks up ahead, it's a lot easier to turn the boat to get away from those wreckages. Before that, it was a lot more difficult too. It can actually sail against the wind. Normally, before this point, boats had to go along with the wind. If the wind was against you, you weren't going anywhere, right? And on top of that, it's very seaworthy, as in it can actually handle the rough tides of the open sea. Right, so this is a big deal. This is like the home run hitter. Henry the Navigator really struck gold on this, ironically. No pun intended. So to really test this theory, what Henry Navigator does is he starts from Portugal and he travels around Africa. Now, what normally the trip would always have to be along the coastlines, and every time as you passed, you would actually have to pay taxes to the African kingdoms that were ruling along the coastline. So he kind of what he did was he ended up going a little bit off the coastline just to test his theory to see, if his boats can handle it. Now, ironically, as he went off the coastline, he ended up actually interacting with some islands that were off the continent of Africa, right? And he ended up colonizing them and realizing that there were natives that lived on these islands. He actually found ways to produce sugar, right? Sugar cane, which is a big money maker for the Portuguese. So as he progresses, he ends up actually having certain boats go and conquer Brazil. That is right off of here. So they do make contact into the Americas. Not Henry Navigator himself, but a lot of the Portuguese explorers go and conquer Brazil. All right. So that means that, great, we just made the first real money-making colony along the path. And his followers end up continuing his path around Africa. But the problem is that it took a really, really long time. So the positive is that they created the caravel, which is it can handle open sea. But the disadvantage is that you still had to travel all the way around Africa, which took a really, really long time, and it doesn't really necessarily solve the problems that all these European monarchs had, right? But there is one thing that does come away from this positive, is that the fact that they now know that there are areas off of the coastline of Africa that do have some places where they can now make some money, okay? Now, with that being said, in come the religious motivation. So the Kingdom of Spain really emerges as really the group that wants to expand with, trying to really conquer or reconquer the world based on the Christian faith. So there was originally the Kingdom of Castile and the Kingdom of Aragon, and they're the two really royal families of those two kingdoms actually combine. They get married. The King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella get married in 1469 and combine the two kingdoms together. Now, they're both religious fanatics, so this actually is a perfect marriage for both of them. So what they do is they combine their forces, they unite and create the Kingdom of Spain, and their sole goal is to expand the Christian faith. So first off, they want to do is kick the Moors, which were the Muslims within they're actually Moroccan Muslims, out of the Iberian Peninsula, and they really started this reconquista, this Christian reconquering back again, in Europe. So that's their goal. And what happens is they take a look at what Portugal's doing, what Henry the Navigator has done, and all these his followers are now doing. They're expanding their territory, they're colonizing different parts, and they're getting annoyed because they're kind of being left out of this. So in comes Christopher Columbus, because they need a guy who's going to do it for them. So Christopher Columbus was born in Italy in generally around 1452, and he has this dream, he has this idea that he's going to go to China, he's going to convert the Chinese to Christianity, and he's going to start a second Reconquista, right? Now, he tries to get money for his voyages, right? He goes to Portugal, nah son. He goes to France, not having it. And he goes to England and say, no thanks, I'm good here. They all turn him down. Now he goes to Spain, and he knows that they're religious nuts. So he says to them, listen, I have this idea of starting the second Reconquista. And they think he's nuts. They don't really trust him. They think he's kind of a washed up explorer. But they say, all right, you know what? We'll give you some money. We'll give you 3 ships, 87 men. Go ahead and see what you find. So August of 1492, he sails. He lands in the Bahamas. He thinks he lands in the Indies, and that's why he calls them the Indians. Now, let me explain something to you when I look at this map. There's a misconception that a lot of Europeans thought that the world was flat. That's actually not true. The Greeks actually found out that the world was round, and Europeans knew that the world was round. The problem is that they didn't think there was any land out here. They thought it was open sea, right? And before the caravel, they were like, there's no shot that we can sail in open water without dying. So even when the caravel was in existence, they saw the land around Africa, how long it took to get around Africa. And they said, well, to think of that, this whole giant area is open water. The amount of time it's going to take for us to sail west and go all the way around the globe and reach China is going to be a long time. But Christopher Columbus thought, well, I got nothing to lose. I got no shot going to Portugal, going to France, going to England, and I had one last chance to make glory for myself. So he thinks, I'm going to be that guy to sail across. And with the caravel now available to him, he thinks that I can make the trip. So when he sails west, he thinks he's going to end up coming out on this side of the world. All of a sudden, they land into, a whole new landmass shows up, and he thinks he lands in the Indies. Okay? Now, ironically, people always coin that Christopher Columbus had founded the Americas, but generally around the time of 1000 AD, the Vikings did. The Vikings had colonized Greenland, and they went into areas of Canada, but they didn't really last long there, so no one in Europe really knew about it, because the Vikings really kept it to themselves because they wasn't so successful. So when we take a look at what Christopher Columbus does, there's a lot of things that we're going to go into, especially with the Columbian Exchange. But let's just jump into now exploration. So I gave you guys actually a review video that goes over topic 1.3, and actually it's a solid, simplified version of what I just talked about. So just in case I went too fast for you, let me know. But I would suggest watching this just to help you guys out. So let's take a look at the worksheet here. So there's a few parts. I'll explain it to you. I'm not going to go too much in depth here, but the first part is going to be explaining an example for each of these the 3 G's, right? And then if you had to choose which of these factors was the major driving force for exploration, explain why. Then what we're going to do is jump into a Christopher Columbus journal article, or journal entry, I mean. You're going to read this journal entry and you're going to fill out the HAP analysis. Now, HAP analysis is really good to help you guys practice for the AP exam, okay? The HAP analysis stands for H, which is historical situation. You have to give some background. When and where was this document written or created? How might this affect the meaning of it? And just really giving a lot of context, okay? Then you have the A, the audience. What was the intended audience of this document? What was the targeted group? Why who was this person writing this for? Then you have the P, the point of view, right? This is now we look at the point of reference, like the fact that Christopher Columbus is writing this. What does this mean, right? And give some information here about the point of view and the biases that might be there. And then lastly, the purpose, right? What was the purpose, the goal of writing this journal entry, right? You're going to fill out all this information and put it in these boxes here. All right, now we're going to go to the next part. Now, this is giving you a little bit of a hindsight or kind of some guidance into what we're going to talk about next, into when the colonies are being formed. What this little chart does is it gives you a little bit of a kind of a head start on the 3 different kingdoms that had colonized America, right? And gave you a little bit of a compare and contrast chart here, okay? So what I did was you now have to take some of this information and put it into the compare and contrast. Okay, you pick out the most important information, put it in here. Then you're going to answer these questions, and this is going to be like a final little summary paragraph. Basically, it's going to help you kind of condense all your information that you just learned about. What you're going to do is first you're going to write out are there any similarities and differences, right? Then you're going to say, to what extent are they similar or different? You're going to pick, are they more similar or are they more different? You're going to list 3 pieces of evidence to support your claim. Are they more similar or are they different? Then you're going to provide a opposing view, as in whichever the opposite of the view you just gave. So if you pick similar, it means in the opposing view you say why they're different and put that here. Then you're going to give a piece of evidence to explain why it's the opposing view. This is really important, right? Because for essays on the AP exam, you have to have a counter argument to your argument, and it's going to help us kind of develop that skill. Okay, guys, so that's it for me. A solid video, goes over a lot of, rehashes some old information, talks about some new information. It's pretty solid, but if you guys have any questions, please let me know. All right, guys, that's it for me. Have a good one.